Hi, and welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. I'm Amanda Nystrom, the Chief Operating Officer at Command Prompt, a leader in open source excellence since 1997. We hope that you enjoy the podcast today and contact us for your Postgres and full stack needs, including 24/7 support. Find us at 503-667-4564 at commandprompt.com or at sales@commandprompt.com. Enjoy.
Greenplum is a modern database that isn't limited by your data size or vertical scaling limitations. For more information or to get in touch, visit greenplum.org.
Welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Our guest today is Ajay Kulkarni, founder and CEO at Timescale DB. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Technically, I'm founder CEO at Timescale. Timescale DB is one of our products, but
I apologize.
but we can talk about that. No,
yeah,
no, you're fine.
So the company is Timescale. Is it Timescale Inc. or LLC?
Timescale Incorporated. Timescale Incorporated.
Okay, and one of your products is Timescale DB, which is what you probably know most for.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well, before we get into the tech of it, because that's what everybody wants to hear, so we need to build some anticipation. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in tech.
Yeah, my background, I grew up around tech. My father has been in the computer industry for as long as I can remember. And so I grew up around computers and, gigantic 40 megabyte hard drives, that always have gotten small over time. And I think it all started probably in 1996 when I was applying to colleges, initially as a pre-med, thinking I'd go into sports medicine or something medically oriented. And I remember just being exposed to the internet over the summer and just thinking, hey, I don't know what this thing is, but it just seems really cool. And this is what I want to do. And that's when I decided to major in computer science, went to MIT. And that's how I got started.
Interesting. So sports medicine, was that I like sports, but I'm not, and this is not derogatory, just not good enough to play, or you just enjoyed sports medicine?
Yeah. Well, I don't am I good enough to be a professional athlete? Probably not. Maybe there's a sport somewhere in the world, but probably not. But I've always loved fitness. I've always loved exercise. I swim every day these days, and I don't know, maybe being Indian, maybe my options were like engineering or medicine. Maybe that was the universe of things I was considering. And I did well in AP Bio. It's not like So no, but I think that's so long ago. I think it's really been computers, for the past 25, 30 years. That's been my thing, and I'm so happy because it's the thing that I'm most passionate about professionally.
It's actually funny that you brought up, that you're Indian. The recording we did right before yours was with a lovely, hugely brilliant gal with VMware who's Indian. And I was asking about the caste system and how does that still apply? Is it still real? And how did she get into tech? And she's like, well, my choices were medicine or computers. So and she went with computers.
No, it's real, man. That has changed, but when I was growing up, for sure.
Okay. Well, so let's, obviously you're passionate about comp sci. You've been doing it for 25 years. I've been doing it since 90, I think.
Sure.
And you then went to get your MBA.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a...
Let me tell you a funny story. The funny story, and it kind of dovetails to Timescale. So my co-founder is Mike Friedman, professor of computer science at Princeton, brilliant guy, great guy too. I've known him. So I've known Mike for 25 years, and we met the first week of college. And Mike and I, we were roommates. We worked on kind of papers and homework assignments together. I always did pretty well, but he always did better than me. So he's definitely like the, at least in that dimension, the smarter one. And the funny story is that when we were doing our masters together, we had a third roommate, a gentleman named Nick, who also ended up becoming computer science faculty in academia. And I remember talking to Nick about how he was working on these new kind of routing algorithms. And I remember thinking this, I'm like 21, 22 years old, pretty young. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool, but I would rather sell the router. And like, I've always had this kind of like instinct, desire, whatever the right word is, to be at the intersection of cutting edge technology in the market. And I think it's because I just like seeing the immediate impact of what I'm doing. But it's also, I feel like cutting edge technology, because I think technology is such an incredible lever for like changing the world. But I want to be at the intersection of that in the market because I want the impact now. And I think it's great, someone's doing the research that'll have an impact 5 years down the line. I think we need people to do that. But for me, it's always been at that intersection. And so, after my master's, I went, I essentially, worked at a few startups, realized that I still had a lot to learn about the business world, went back to MIT for my MBA. And out of that, came out, with, these entrepreneurial desires. And that's, started my first company, and then I sold that. And then we ended up starting Timescale.
Oh, now this intersection that
Yeah.
you're talking about, it's funny because I prefer, we have the consultancy Command Prompt, and I prefer not quite the cutting edge. I did the cutting edge when I was young, right? But now I prefer the glaringly stable profit, right? So I'm kind of curious, how do you, when you're at that intersection, you want to see that impact, right away, or at least very quickly. How do you keep that relevant? Because things shift. I mean, you and I, just in time we've known each other, have seen markets and things shift. The only thing that's been stable is that the base of our company, which is PostgreSQL, has continued to grow. So how do you keep your attention, you know what I'm saying, so that Timescale continues to grow, for example?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. First is it's the intersection of cutting edge technology in the market. So if you're building something that no one needs, that's not what I'm interested in. So it's that intersection, and you can have stable, growing profits living at that intersection. I mean, that's what we're doing right now with Timescale, but it does require a different mentality. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's actually kind of natural for me because I am a naturally curious person. I'm always trying to learn new things. I always like to stay on top of the new thing. One of my biggest fears is just getting stale. And because I feel like if you're not learning, then I don't know, you're dying. I mean, that's too dramatic, but I feel like it's, I want to be constantly learning. One of our company values at Timescale is actually to remain a student and work in life. And I totally believe that. I think the tech industry is pretty wild because it's one of those few industries where the world changes every 5 years. So if you're not, it's like an industry where experience can be a liability. And often it's like you have to actually stay nimble and stay curious and keep learning. And I find that exciting. I find that really exciting. There's always something new to learn. And so I think I just do it naturally. But I think I don't know, it's one of the advantages of technology is it's such a rapidly evolving industry that there's always new opportunities to do something to have a positive impact on the world.
Well, it's interesting because I agree with you, and that's actually something that we practice as a Command Prompt, is this idea of professional development, essentially, right? Make sure that you're continuing not only with your skills but other things. And as we were talking before we started recording, as you know, we're on a cross country trip in a school bus that we converted into an RV.
Yeah.
Well, that had kind of turned me to a different side of tech, right? I've been in open source and Linux and everything for 35 years, but then I had to learn how to be a carpenter, which is highly technical. I had to learn solar, which is highly technical. And I had to learn things like, voltage versus amperage versus, inverters and all this weird stuff that has nothing to do with what you and I do on a daily basis. And that's actually something that I think is coming back around with the new shift, or I should say the accelerated shift to alternative energy, is that people are starting to recognize that tech, there's a whole generation of tech that's slightly younger than you and I that think that tech is software, right? It's how I connect to the internet, what web browser I'm using, what programming language, whatever. But tech is actually, it's, science, technology, engineering, right? And everything from chemistry in terms of what kind of asphalt to apply to roads. They're doing research now where they find that if you use dyes or alternative forms of asphalt that aren't black, you can actually reduce the ambient temperature of your city by up to 7 degrees.
I mean, tech is also, if you want to go further back, tech is the printing press. It is papyrus.
Yeah.
It is the wheel. It is the first pre-human, like Homo sapiens who picked up a rock and used it as a hammer. It's like, that. I mean, right? That's tech.
Yeah, no,
think about
that's engineering right there.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I'm with you, and I think these days, I think what's interesting these days is I think often software is the driver of the disruption, but the disruption is not limited to software. So I think a lot of clean energy, software is a key part of it. You look at electric vehicles, look at the Tesla. Software is a key driver of why this electric vehicle is so disruptive. But you're right, it's not just the software, and everything is starting to blend together. And I think one of the things we believe at Timescale is every company is either a software company becoming a software company or is getting replaced by a software company. And so, you could be in the solar industry, but eventually you're going to be a software company in the solar industry.
Well, definitely. I mean, if nothing else, for example, I have an MPPT controller for my solar. That's what charges the batteries. That's controlled by software, right? But you said something actually in that segment that's very, very good. You said the wheel.
Yeah.
Right? So I want to talk about the wheel for a second, because you've been in tech and I've been in tech long enough to realize that the cloud is just another reinvention of a wheel.
Sure.
Right? I was doing cloud in 95. It was called virtual hosting.
Yeah.
Right? And then we went, and then if you were on FreeBSD, they used jails. And then, VMware became very, very big. And you started, ESXi was where it was at. And then you were doing all your hosting on top of that. And now we're into this whole new thing where we're doing this composition of virtualization, and it's not a blade, but from a hardware perspective and for simplicity's sake, it's a blade, right? And my question to you is, Timescale's doing a lot of really interesting things in making Postgres better, right? For a certain subset of features through its extension. How are you going to stay ahead of the wheel that is Postgres that will eventually continue to implement a lot of these features? Specifically the compression features.
Oh, you're going that way. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Or go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, or the auto partitioning, right? Those are all going to come about in Postgres eventually, natively.
Yeah. So first, you're talking about the wheel. That reminded me of something. Yeah. So let me maybe answer that in two parts. Number one is, are you a Star Wars fan?
Come on, man.
Sorry.
Seriously.
Okay. I'm a huge fan.
I waited in line at 6 years old, all the way around the theater to see Return of the Jedi. Okay.
That's wonderful. I was too young to remember that, but I did wait in line for the Phantom Menace, and yeah. So so George Lucas has this line where he says, "History doesn't repeat itself; it rhymes." And I think
that's interesting.
And there's an element. I mean, you can see that in like the prequels and what he did, But I think there's an element of that in technology, when there's all this talk of like, oh, this cloud, this is what we had before, or hey, these giant data centers are no different than the mainframe, and it's like, yeah, there are similarities, and to some degree, I think the universe does kind of oscillate between extremes, technology, the industry, the market, the universe, whatever you look at, but I think they're still different, and saying it's the same, I think is underestimating the massive impact that the cloud is having on how we consume technology. And my definition of cloud is just the SaaSification of software infrastructure. And I think, SaaS initially started off in the application layer with like CRMs, maybe was that 20, 30 years ago. And it was disruptive because it was like, hey, like we're lowering the barrier to try something, which means it's easier to get started, which means that the end user can be the decision maker, not the CIO who's never going to use the software. It means that products can win based on the quality of the product experience and not who, provides the better steak dinner, right? And I think these are all, these innovations, not in terms of, just the product, which we can talk about, but also the way software is consumed. And I think if you look at that trend, that's what's happening to databases. It's just like databases are essentially becoming SaaS software, and database companies are becoming SaaS companies. And I think one thing that we've been doing is almost all of our growth has come without a sales team. All our revenue growth has come without a sales team. We just added a sales leader maybe a month ago, but I think it's a new way of selling and consuming software. And this, I'm not even talking about the way you can re-architect database for the cloud. Forget that, So I think it's a pretty big, massive shift. And I could continue to wax poetic on cloud if you want, but I think it's a way bigger disruption than people realize, and I think it's way different than what happened before. But there are similarities, which is why I would say it rhymes. I think with Postgres, I mean, we love Postgres, and we don't view Postgres as competition. We view it as
Sure. Yeah.
We're part of the ecosystem, and Timescale. Our mission is to supercharge Postgres, and we believe that. Timescale, we're inherently we're optimists. We believe in the power of technology and software to make the world a better place. All great software is built on great databases, and we believe Postgres provides that database foundation. And so, our mission at Timescale is to help build the next wave of computing, and like build for the builders, build for the fellow optimists. But we do that by supercharging Postgres. And so, yes, like the Postgres core community is adding things, and yes, like sometimes they add things that we added 2-3 years ago. Okay, fine, but like we're continue to innovate, and we will either in some areas we'll always be a few years ahead of Postgres core,
Sure.
because we can innovate faster than they can, only because they have a much higher kind of risk. What's the term? Sensitivity, right? Because I mean, they're dealing with like massive installations, right? And we're at Timescale, and so we can afford to innovate a little bit more faster. But in other areas, like we're just building things that will never be in core because they don't need to be in core, and that's why core developed the whole extension framework in the first place.
Right.
Like you look at PostGIS, like PostGIS has been a healthy extension for years, and are there some elements of PostGIS that could be built in the core? Yeah, but no one's done it. Why not? Because you can get it for free already through the PostGIS extension. Like, why invest your time there? So my approach is like, our goal is we want to make Postgres better. We want to make Postgres community better. We employ upstream contributors. We sponsor conferences, as you know. We sponsor meetups. We sponsor group. But in our mind, it's like, hey, we're here to help build the next wave of computing. We're very cloud centric. And so we're naturally innovating on a different, I think, vector than the Postgres core community. There might be some overlap, but I think over time there'll be less and less overlap, but it'd be highly complementary, which is, I think, is the nature of the Postgres extension framework in general, is to kind of build better together.
Do you see, well, a couple things there. One, I think you're right. I mean, the PostgreSQL.org community, core community, is by their very nature conservative.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
By
the nature of who they are, what they are, they're all
as they should be.
scientists.
I think that's the right way to behave. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't want to put all your money into something that's going to lose it, right? And Postgres isn't going to lose it.
Well, they also have like much larger legacy installations to worry about than we do as a new startup. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
So wait, now that's actually a good point. How long has Timescale been around?
5.5 years.
And you still consider yourself a startup?
Well, yeah.
At what point are you, okay, well, you say that, but at what point are you not a startup?
I don't know. I feel like culturally, I think there's an association between startup and existential risk, and kind of existential hunger. And I feel like if we ever, and a desire to move quickly. And I feel like if we ever lost that hunger, I think that's when we start to lose. So hopefully we never stop feeling like a startup, But like generally when I think about, I compare ourselves against like Mongo or Amazon. That's how I compare ourselves against. And against them, it's like, yeah, we're tiny, And no matter how, if we have 160 people now, it's a lot more than what we had 2 years ago. But even if we had 1,000 people, it would still be tiny.
Well, and Mongo's public, and they've been around for, I don't know, like 12 years, something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
I actually had Mark Porter, their CTO, on this.
I listened to that podcast. Yeah, I listened to the interview, yeah.
I learned a lot from him, from his time at Amazon as well as at Mongo. Okay, you said you're a cloud-centric company. There was a recent, you may have saw it. There was a recent blog or article, whatever you want to put it out, by one of the founders of Hay. And yeah.
I mean, look, it's like generators. Are there people in the world who should be running their own generator? Yeah, there are a lot of exotic use cases where you don't want to rely on the grid or you can't rely on the grid. You know, but for most people, you don't want to run your own generator. You know,
Right.
maybe you'll have a backup if you're at a certain scale. You know, if you're a hospital or something. But and so I think let's not let the exotic edge cases drive the narrative. You know, I think it makes a great blog post, and I think those folks at Hey, I think they like to be contrarian and controversial, but the economics of the cloud, it just make a ton of sense for like almost every company out there. You know, and there's going to be a few, there's going to be a handful that if you're at a certain scale or some exotic needs, where it won't make sense. But I mean, there's always ways to get cost efficiency by vertically integrating, but are you going to focus on that? You're going to focus on driving top line growth by building a better product and blah blah blah. You know, so yeah. So I think often it's the exotic use cases that drive the narrative, because whenever something's counterintuitive, that's what gets all the attention. But I mean, it's like today. Like, is the fax machine dead? No, it's not dead. Some people still use the fax machine. There's still use cases for it. But it's essentially dead. Like, are mainframes dead? No, there are people who still use mainframes out there, and there's still use cases for mainframes, but they're essentially dead, So I think at some point, I think you just say, hey, it's not a religious thing. It's not is cloud or nothing. It's you will probably not want to manage your own data center. Soon you'll probably not want to manage your own database. Eventually it's, you just want to focus on your application and making your customer happy,
So that's an interesting point, because I also didn't 100% agree with him, but I also don't 100% agree with the idea of SaaSification. I'm a firm believer in, God, for heaven's sake, don't make me ever own another computer that I have to manage as a server, right? I don't ever want to worry about hard drives, power supplies, cooling, backup. I don't want to worry about any of that. So I do believe as infrastructure as a service, right? Yep. Absolutely.
Yep.
And one of my favorite things to do is to deploy EC2 in Postgres for a client, sometimes Timescale, and save them literally 50% on what RDS is going to cost them, right?
Love it. Yep.
But a lot of people would consider that kind of like, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but the people, you did say eccentric, and I guess there's a line. Exotic, sorry, yes, yeah. Not eccentric. That was just a generator, people. No, exotic.
I mean, if you're a hospital, you should have you need to have backup generators. Like, these things, they exist, but yeah.
Well, anyway, I was just thinking. I mean, from a generator perspective, I mean, even though that's not where I was going, there is a whole class of people, and it's not a small class of people, especially now that everybody's work from home, that is buying Starlink and living out in the middle of nowhere, and you bet they've got a generator, right? They have to.
Yeah, as a backup. But what percentage of people do you think that is? Do you think it's 50%?
It depends on how wide you want to bring it, and not 50, but I would a strong 25.
25%. So the majority don't do it. There
you go. But also keep in mind that any farm, all the people that grow our food.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, do you want to highlight are there exceptions? Yeah. Do you want to highlight the exceptions, or you want to talk about what most people are doing? And I think often,
sure.
Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right there, and I think the point where I was going is sure, we can target and understand this is the way the command prompt is. We can target let's say the 65%. Okay, this bubble here is us and what we do, and but there's a lot of companies, for example, that only target Fortune 50.
Yeah. Right,
and they got 50 customers, and they're making money that you and I mean, we just stare at it on the screen, right? That's the only way we'll ever see that. So I guess the point is there's a market in
So you're equating Fortune 50 with not cloud.
Well, I know that a lot of Fortune 50 is on cloud, but I also
Yeah.
know that a lot of Fortune 50,
I mean,
some of their stuff goes nowhere near the cloud.
So imagine like we're in a time machine. We go back to 2006, 2007, right? You and I would
Okay.
have a similar discussion, and you would probably be saying, "Hey, this new like Amazon Web Services thing is cool, but it's only for startups. It's only for toys. Large companies will never trust, you know, another company with their data, their servers."
Right.
And today, like the cloud is a $1 trillion industry. Like obviously, that's like that's happening, right? And so it's kind of like, yeah, it's like, does Mongo have Fortune 50 companies in their cloud service? Yeah. Do we have them on our cloud service? Yeah. So, so I wouldn't equate Fortune 50 with cloud. How about this? The main way we make money, here's the data point. The main way Timescale makes money, it's like 90, whatever percent of a large percent of revenue, uh, is through the cloud. Well, we don't
Is it
monetize on.
your cloud or the cloud in general?
No, our cloud, our
Okay.
managed service, that we manage for other people, and it's we have several hundred customers. Uh, some of them are really large, and some of them are not. And uh, yeah, all of our software is free. We don't monetize on prem, and we've built a really healthy business doing that. And it's just so clearly the future. And I think it's will there always be will there ever be a market for on-prem? Yes, but I think increasingly, as every company becomes a software company, you have to ask yourself, hey, do you want to be in the database business, or do you want to be in the music business? Do you want to be in the gaming business? Do you want to be in the e-commerce business, right? And most of the people say, hey, like, I don't want to be in the database business. I don't want to manage this thing. And yes, like, EC2 is cheaper than RDS, but then I have to pay a team of people to manage it. And when it goes down, we don't have the expertise in house, or if we run an upgrade and upgrade goes poorly, or something else happens, like that costs me money. And I don't want to deal with that because that's actually more expensive. And yes, at a certain scale, you might say, hey, economies of scale, that actually makes sense for me to manage it myself. Or maybe, I don't know, I'm an Uber or I'm a Salesforce and I'm just naturally very tech savvy. Okay, fine. But I think for most companies out there, especially as every company becomes a software company, uh, they're going to say, hey, like, I want to be in my business, not in the database business. So I want to outsource it.
Well, no, and I mean, I get that. That's what Command Prompt has always done, right? They're just outsourcing the management to us. I mean, we got lots of customers that are using RDS, and they have us manage their RDS because just what you said,
Right.
They want to sell their furniture or their sandwiches or whatever. They don't want to worry about the database or the monitoring or who's going to answer the phone when the backup doesn't work and things like that.
You know what I think what's happening, JD, is that, like, we often talk about one of our board members is a great analogy where he talks about, like, the horseless carriage versus the automobile. And the horseless carriage is like applying the previous mental model to a new paradigm, right? And the automobile is like, hey, this is something totally new, right? And I think in the old world, you ran a database on a machine with 8 CPU and a terabyte of disk, right? In your data center, whatever, right? And then in the first V1 of the cloud, you did the same thing. You just ran a database in a VM with 8 vCPU with maybe a terabyte of network attached disk,
Right.
but it's the same paradigm. And I think that's, like, some people call it skeuomorphism. It's essentially applying the old paradigm to this new world. The reality is that when you actually look at the cloud as a new way of architecting a database experience, there is a lot you can do in a managed service that you can't do in a self-managed service. And I think that's where the industry is heading. And that's where it's not about, I don't think the difference is going to be, hey, do I want to self-manage this, or do I want someone else to manage it for me? It's going to be, hey, do I want to use this new kind of cloud native re-architected database for this new world, or do I want to use this kind of old paradigm? And I think that's the difference. We actually call this thing internally. We call this the vision of the database cloud. It's not a database in the cloud; it's the database cloud. And I mean, that's what we're building at Timescale. And I think as we head in that direction, um, the gap, it won't be like, do I want this flavor or that flavor? It'll be two totally different things.
Okay, but doesn't that present actually a problem for the client in the long run? I mean, not saying
heard about
Timescale.
lock-in?
Very good. So for Timescale, it's a little different. Yeah. So if you're writing to Timescale, there's an obvious, this is what I'm doing, right? But if you take it back away from Timescale and you look at someone like, it doesn't matter if it's AWS or Google or Azure, right? It doesn't matter. The fact is you start writing to their tools, you have created lock-in. And when you look at someone like an Amazon, who their margins are high, right, for cloud services, when they should be shrinking, right? Based on growth, your profit should go up, but your margins should go down. And eventually, you're creating this environment where as you build your new products, you're not taking into account the future. You're taking into account the now. And if you don't have that forward-looking situation, you're going to fail. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, there was a company called Nautilus. Okay. And actually, I have two examples of this. First one's Nautilus. Nautilus is every Linux user that runs GNOME runs Nautilus. It's the file manager. And these guys convinced somebody to give them $15 million to build a file manager that was then going to turn into basically an app store. Okay. Way ahead of their time. Completely wrong platform, right? Because it was Linux. But they weren't thinking about the future of it, right? How do we get to that next step? The next one I'll bring up is Great Bridge Software, because Great Bridge Software, anyone who knows Command Prompt, they are who created Command Prompt is today. Way back, it had Ned Lilly from Xtuple. They had employed a bunch of core members from PostgreSQL. Their CEO or whatever is from Red Hat. And we weren't yet a Postgres support company. Basically, we were a custom development management company, but Postgres was our preferred platform. So we called them and said, hey, look, we might call you once a year just in case. How much is that going to cost? They said $15,000. I said, thank you very much. Hung up. They were out of business 8 months later. And now 25 years later, we're doing what they should have done originally, because their answer allowed me to see the future of Postgres. What do we do? How do you get people to see that forward for you, right? Because you can't expect that clients forever, because it's cyclical, right? Originally, we had a bunch of people on virtual hosting because they wanted to save money, but then they migrated back out to their own, either virtual as their own V machines, or even back into the data center. Then the cloud came around and they migrate back into the cloud. Originally, Apple and Verizon wanted nothing to do with it. Now they're huge users of like Aurora. So how are you going to prep for that with your clients? How are you going to help your legacy clients not be legacy?
So there's initial question around lock-in.
Yep.
The second question about how do I help my customers modernize? Is that the question?
That could be a reasonable way to put it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So maybe I'll answer that in two parts. Yeah, so in terms of lock-in, it's really interesting. There's a statement out there. I can't take credit for it, but I love it. I totally agree with it. Is that with the cloud, there's a movement from open source to open standards. And I think with Timescale, we're built on the open standard of Postgres. So if you are worried about lock-in, you can move from us to self-managed Postgres. You can move from us to RDS, move from us to any other thing that supports Postgres. But the way we supercharge Postgres, the other services won't. And in fact, we're taking advantage of elements in the cloud that would be much harder to do yourself. And one example of that is something we just launched, which is data tiering on top of S3. And this idea that a database doesn't have to be limited to disk. And in fact, in the cloud, you have this really cheap consumption-based limitless thing called object storage.
Mhm.
And we've built this ability to essentially have, our same hyper table construct, same virtualized table, but live across disk and S3. And over time, you can age old data and have it sit on S3, which essentially is sitting on cost, and it's seamless to the user. When you query the table, if the data sits on disk or sits on S3, it's seamless. It's a little bit extra latency on S3, but at a much lower cost, right?
Sure.
And so these are some of the features that we're building. Now, if we want to do that for on-prem, one could be a lot harder because I'm not sure what cloud you're on. I'm not sure what object storage things. I'm not sure what your S3 buckets are. There's a lot of configuration required. Probably this is a really crappy user experience. But in the cloud, it's seamless. It's just seamless. So these are some of the ways we're building the database cloud of the future. But at the same time, if you decide, hey, like I don't want to use Timescale, maybe for X, Y, and Z reason, because we're just Postgres, you can still move to another Postgres service. And so that where I think it's not about open source, it's about open standards. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's happening in the world. And I think that's the answer to lock-in,
That's interesting. I mean, obviously, I guess it depends on how you define open standards. To my knowledge, I could be wrong, but there is no IETF or IEEE standard for object storage, for example. I honestly haven't looked, but to my knowledge, there is not. But it's interesting, this feature. So now we really have to make sure that this comes out after you announce. You said open standard. Now, I am not going to say that S3 is a standard.
No. But here's the point. The point isn't S3. The point is that we can build this, and you don't even know.
Right.
You don't even need to know. It's behind the scenes, and if you ask, we'll tell you. But it's behind the scenes. It's seamless, and we could be using S3. We could be using Minio. We could be using something else we developed. But the point is that, like in the cloud, we're able to deliver a much better cost performance, like much lower cost for the same performance than you can on-prem. Which is the advantage of the database cloud, of re-architecting for the cloud. One, an example of the advantage. But at the same time, if you are worried about lock-in, then you can always move and essentially just repoint your application to self-managed Postgres. It'll cost you more, but like you can do that if you want,
But
and so
your
I think
cloud
that's
offers
lock-in. Yeah.
Your cloud offers features that, I mean, that we can't actually get. For example, I mean, I'm assuming that Timescale, the SaaSification of Timescale, okay, that if I sign up for the Timescale cloud, I'm getting certain features that I'm not getting when I do a Git pull for Timescale.
Yeah, I mean, there's some features that don't make sense on-prem but make sense in the cloud. But the core database experience, your insert statements, your select statements, they're essentially the same. There might be some tweaks you'd have to do, but it's very different than the old world, which is like, like if I want to move off of, like if I want to move from Salesforce to another CRM, that would just take a lot of effort. Right, exactly. You just cringed. That is lock-in. But with Timescale, you don't have to rewrite your application. You just have to maybe tweak some of your commands. It's like, in on the spectrum of lock-in and not lock-in, it's way closer to not lock-in. Yeah.
Well, and then I do want to get to the modernization part, but I actually wanted to touch on S3 because you actually brought up a part that I was going to bring up, which is the Minio, right? The open source implementation of S3, I believe is what that is.
Minio, yeah.
Yeah, and then I actually had a call yesterday with a company that's doing non-centralized, globally distributed storage with an S3 interface. It's not S3, obviously.
Yep.
And they've got a really cool
example of an open standard. S3 becoming an open standard.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going. Instead of a bunch of engineers in a back room saying this is how we should transport packets over the internet, the market is actually essentially determining what the open standard for this store, at least what the API for this storage is, which is S3. Because everybody now, even open source projects that you would think would never do that, like say PG Backrest, right? They have an S3 interface because that's where people are putting their data, whether it's on Amazon or not, right? So tailing into that, let's talk to me about the modernization of a client, right? Because one of the things, as you said, command prompt being a professional services and support company, we have legacy, what people would consider legacy clients. I call them old money clients, right? Clients that have reached their market, whether it's growing or shrinking. They're profitable, but they have no need to change their infrastructure.
Yeah.
But if you're going to modernize them, and as people come down and they come into these data centers and like, God, why are we running all these racks of servers and our electrical bills through the roof? And why don't we migrate it to Timescale? How do we make that argument to someone who has been doing it the way they've done it successfully for 25 years?
I don't think that's my job. I don't think my job is to convince you of the powers of cloud. And in fact, like most of our, all of our customers, probably all of them, they're people who've already adopted cloud. A lot of them are digitally native companies, but even the ones who aren't, they've already seen the value of cloud, and they come to us because we solve their problem. But if you don't believe in cloud, then yeah, I think that's like, there's like the Jeffrey Moore bell curve, and there are people who are the first half of the curve, early adopters of cloud, and the second half of the curve, late adopters of cloud or laggards or whatever. And the early adopters market is still really large,
Yes.
That first half. And that's where the growth is. This later thing are the dinosaurs, or people who are the exotics, which, so I don't know. I don't view it as my job to convince you to modernize. Now, if you come to me and say, "Hey, we want to modernize and we're running Timescale on-prem or Postgres on-prem, and we want to adopt a managed service because we see the value of it," then we can help you with that. But I don't view it as my job to be like. I think I'm the evangelist for Timescale and Postgres. I'm not the evangelist for cloud. There are people on Amazon who get paid to do that.
Okay, that's fair. So, all right.
And cloud being $1 trillion industry, like I don't think I need to create that market. That market already exists.
But that's certainly true. You just have to get your piece of it.
That's right.
Okay. You are a Timescale and Postgres evangelist.
Yeah.
Tell me your favorite thing about Postgres and your least favorite thing about Postgres.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my favorite aspect about Postgres, and I mean this in a really positive way, is that it's boring. I think
Yes.
your database should be boring.
You're right.
Right?
Yes.
In fact, our first blog post when we announced Timescale DB in April 2017, the title was "When Boring is Awesome." Because look, you don't want your database to be exciting. It's kind of like your tax accountant. You don't want your accountant to be innovative. Right? You want them to be boring, right?
Well, certain people do, but they eventually get caught. So.
Yeah, that's you know what I mean. Yeah. So I think with Postgres, and I think it even comes from the name. The name is really boring, But I think that works. It works because developers are like, I don't want to have to think about this. And I often equate being in the database business. Databases are almost like Wi-Fi. No, it's highly differentiated. Wi-Fi is commoditized, not exactly the same, but it's differentiated. If I'm thinking about my Wi-Fi, something is wrong. It's slow, it's down. But so my database, if I'm thinking about my database, then something is wrong. I don't want to have to think about it. I want to just trust it. And that's what I love about Postgres is that it is reliable. It's a very reliable product. But the way the community has built the product is they haven't gone for the shiny things. They focused on hey, how do we build something that just works? I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a testament, not just the project, it's a testament to the community, the core community who've been building this, diligently building and evolving this database for decades.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't like about it is that the community, because it's a community not driven by a company, it's sometimes it just feels like there's a lot of infighting.
Mm-hmm.
And now these companies have started to kind of, I don't know, merged together. But I remember 5 years ago, like it was EDB versus Second Quadrant versus OpenSCG versus whoever else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes this feels like what's the analogy? It's like people fighting amongst themselves when we should be unified against against the larger enemy, which is everything that's not Postgres.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And I'm not saying everyone is like this. I'm not saying most people are like this. I'm just saying that like there's more of this than I think is healthy in the Postgres community. And sometimes people have directed that towards us. And it's kind of like, hey, like you're focused on the wrong thing. Like we're on the same side. We're trying to drive the growth of Postgres. And, like the opportunity isn't to grab market share from each other. The opportunity is just to grow the pie. And like, yes, grab market share from other databases, but also when the next startup gets started and the next developer starts their own thing in the next project, get them to pick Postgres and not something else. I think that's the future, And so that's the thing I like the least is like, is this element of infighting, which, I think we're starting to get past it, but that's what surprised me the most in 2017 when I first got in the Postgres community. And that's the thing I like the least.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's been in the community for as long as I have, it's been an interesting experience with that. There seems to be a certain level of ego involved versus a look at the greater picture of how we can help people love Postgres. Right. All right. Let's switch gears for a second. Because there was an announcement that happened recently. Hell has frozen over. And Oracle is supporting Postgres as a managed service. Now, one, I think it was inevitable. I mean, Oracle's there to make money. And anyone who knows what they're doing is using Postgres and Oracle where they need to. Otherwise, they're just using Postgres. And I think that Oracle came down and said, okay, well, shit. We thought it was going to be MySQL. It's not, so we got to do this. But the name that they chose was interesting to me. Now, I don't know this, and there's not a whole lot of information about this yet, but the name they chose is actually, the Aries name, is actually a research done on how to do undo logs, which would eliminate vacuum from Postgres. If that's what they actually did, if they actually essentially created AlloyDB or Aurora, but they eliminated auto vacuum and they put in their storage infrastructure, like from Oracle. Yeah. I mean, not to take away from you, not to take away from Aurora, but honestly, I would have to argue that might be except for the fact that people hate Oracle, I think that's the database to beat.
Well, where does that database live?
Well, Oracle Cloud.
Aha!
Yes.
Aha!
No. No.
It's like the Eddie Murphy joke. Aha!
That's right.
Right? No, I mean, that's the answer. It's like, oh, yeah, this thing is great if you're using Oracle Cloud. How many companies do you know that use Oracle Cloud?
I know of a single zero.
Hey, imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Yeah, man. I think that announcement was a non-announcement. I don't know. I wasn't that really. They're doing something in Postgres. I can't tell if they're just checking the box or if a skunk works. But if they launched it on AWS, that actually would have been interesting, But it's on OCI, and I don't know a single company who uses that product, and maybe it allows them to like slow down the bleeding. Maybe, right? That the people migrating from Oracle to Aurora or wherever they're going, But I'm not worried about that. That's a segment of the market that I don't think it's a small part of the market.
Well, and I agree with you. I mean, when I talk to companies about migrating off of Oracle, which is something that I do all the time, what I say to them, I say, look, Oracle's not going anywhere. They've been around since the 70s. They have a huge deployment infrastructure.
Yeah.
But every year, the new people, right, on that curve, they're deploying Postgres or Mongo, but they're deploying Postgres. And every year, every time you walk into their office and you're like, we're going to audit you, or here's your new license support fee, and someone else in some company is saying, okay, we still need Oracle for X, but Y and Z we're pushing to Postgres, right? And it's happening every single day.
Yep.
Right. We have just a few minutes.
The same thing with mainframes. Like all the banks, they still use mainframes for something, but I bet you all their new projects they launched the last 5-10 years, I bet you they're not on the mainframe, or 20 years, whatever. It's
Well, you can actually see the shift especially when you talk about banks and mainframes. So 10 years ago, I would say almost all of them on a mainframe. Still, just 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But in the last 5 years, there is either one of two things are happening. Either one, they finally realize that their product, which is our money, has to have an ease of use. And that ease of use will not happen as long as you're interfacing with the protocols that mainframes speak. They don't move at the same rate, right? So I agree with you. I think that sure, they're still using mainframes. Maybe the mainframe's the canonical data store or something, but all their edge, all their front end, it's somewhere else using modern technology, right? One of the things I wanted to get into just before we run out of time is I wanted to talk about leadership. Because that's a kind of a common theme throughout this podcast. If you listen to any of them, it comes up at some point. And it was one of the reasons why I really enjoyed Mark Porter's segments, the 2 segments he did with us.
Yep.
How do you, first, we talked about this a little bit earlier. You said that Timescale has a philosophy of always learning.
Yep.
How do you encourage your team to do that? Because there are engineers, who they are, that have their box. And unless there is something shiny over here, they're not leaving their box. And then there are those who just they're just consuming knowledge. How do we drive the people that are more challenged in doing professional development? How do we get them to understand the importance? How do you do that?
Yeah, maybe I can start with my leadership principles.
Please.
About me, like I've never really been drawn to power. I've never really been. I've always tried to be a low ego individual. Don't always succeed, but I always try. So very little ego about being CEO. And the main thing I want is I just want us all to win. When I talk about a time scale, I want us to win, and I want us to win together. And so my leadership principles kind of dovetail from that. So number one is servant leadership. My goal is to take all the crap out of your way so you can be successful. Kind of make sure we're all pointing in the right direction, pointing in the same direction, and if things are in your way, take them out of your way. We have to hire great people first in order to do that, but we also hire great people. My second leadership principle is around boldness. It's like often, like what we can do is limited by our imagination. There's actually a lot more we can do, and let's be bold about what we're trying to build here. And so when we talk about Timescale, we talk about, hey, we're building the database for the next wave of computing. We're supercharging Postgres. Yes, a lot of people know us for Timescale DB and time series data, but that's just a part of what we're doing, but that's not the vision. I believe in urgency. I believe time is our most limited resource. Time is the one thing you don't get back, and then I believe in having fun because we're spending all this time doing this. If we're not having fun, then something's wrong, right? And so, so the other question is, how do I help people always be learning? Well, I think number one, you lead by example, and I always try to learn myself. I'm always genuinely curious. You also create a safe environment for healthy failures, It's like, hey, we should be experimenting. We should be trying things. We should be asking questions. There's no dumb question. I'm not going to penalize you for asking a question, right? But also always be learning is one of our values. Our other values include like assume positive intent, let the best idea win no matter who says it, right? And all these things, and they come together. It's like, how do you build a healthy company? Well, number one, I think and then top down, like we all have to live these values. If we don't, then people know that they're not real or think they're not real. So I try to live these values. But the number two is you reinforce the right behaviors, and you kind of creates a safe space for you know for experiments and for failures and for being wrong. And it's not about ego. I often say that, hey, like if I'm in a debate, I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I just want to make sure we get to the right answer. And if I'm wrong, that's great. Like then I learned something.
Right.
But if I debate you, it's not because I want to be right, but it's because I just want to get to the right answer. And that's part of the culture that we have at Timescale. And I'm very happy to admit when I'm wrong. I'm very happy to admit when I don't know something. And I'm also curious to learn something new. So I think that's how we kind of build a healthy culture. I'm a big believer in like, the different motivational structures, and I think some people lead by fear, some people lead by stress. I think those are like sugar. I think they work in the short term, but they burn off. I don't think they're sustainable. Um, I think the most self-sustaining motivational system is inspiration. You know, so I want people to feel inspired at Timescale. I want to feel like the company, is like getting out of their way. And if the company's getting in your way, then I feel like it's my job and my executive team's job to get out of your way. Yeah, but that's how I think about leadership. But I think step one is you have to hire great people. If you don't hire great people, then like none of this works. So no, step one, hire great people. And the type of people we look for is like, yes, people who are like hardworking and awesome, like at what they do. But like it's people who are awesome but don't act like they're awesome. It's like people who are like also humble and helpful, and just like high quality, right? And I think we've done a really good job attracting a group like that. And part of that's kind of a flywheel is that I found a couple years ago that because of who we were and our values and our brand, we were just attracting more and more people who naturally believed in these things. um, yeah, so maybe that's how I think about leadership and how I think about culture.
How do you? So you hire great people, and that's important.
Yep.
There's not a right answer here, but do you believe in hiring the potential of a great person?
It depends on the role. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, if you're, um, yeah. I mean, like, yeah, it depends on the individual, and what we're hiring you for. You obviously want to hire people who are always high potential, right? But like, if it takes you a year to get up to speed, well, then it depends, right? Are you
Well,
like,
you're up speed. That's more of like an entry level or something like that, I would assume.
So I believe in potential, but like for different roles, we may need to execute, right away. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we end this, first, yes, I do want to understand why Ajay is such a great looking man.
For the record, I don't believe that, but thank you. I mean, I think I'm all right, but not winning any awards here. Yeah.
And two, if 1 million people watch this, and you want them to have one takeaway about you, what is it?
About me.
About you. Because we know what it is about Timescale, right? So what is it about you?
Can I actually make it about Timescale?
How about both?
Okay, I'll do both. Okay. First, let's do Timescale. A lot of people associate us with Timescale DB, which is the Postgres extension. A lot of people associate with time series data, which is one area we excel in. Timescale is really supercharged Postgres, and at its core, what we are is a group of optimists, or a group of individuals who believe in the power of technology to make the world a better place, and we believe that building at the database layer on top of Postgres puts us in the best position to help build the next wave of computing. So we're here to do that, and Postgres is the way we do that. and to build a better Postgres and supercharge Postgres, especially in the cloud. That's who we are. That's our core identity. Time series is one manifestation of that. It's where we started, but we're already expanding beyond that. We have features like hyperfunctions that make data analysis easier in SQL, even if it's not time series. We support Postgres as well in the cloud, and you'll see more along those dimensions as well. But that's maybe the big thing about Timescale. It's we're here to build the next great database company, and I think what people are seeing right now is just where we're starting.
Okay, and you?
Yeah, about me, I don't know. Something interesting about me, or what people don't know.
Just like if it can be what people don't know, but something that's going to stick with them and that might make them think, at some point I need to buy Ajay a beer or whatever.
I'm an optimist. I would rather see the good in people, and I would rather trust someone and be fooled. I'd rather have that fail that way than to be this jaded person who doesn't trust people who should be trusted. If you know what I mean?
Sure.
And anytime I'm like, oh, is this person being honest or not with me? Like, I'll be like, I'm going to assume positive intent. I'm going to assume that they are honest because I'd rather live my life that way. And look, if it turns out you're not honest, and if it turns out I discover you're not being honest with me, okay, then I put you in a bucket of people not to be trusted. I'm not
round
like
file.
Naive. Yeah, I'm not naive. I'm not like, I'm like, hey, like, if you're untrustworthy, you're untrustworthy. And I choose to work with high quality people. But yeah, man, I think this world. I don't know. I feel like I'm an optimist in the power of technology. I'm an optimist in people. I believe that yes, there are a lot of problems in the world today, but we can work through them. And I think that's the only healthy attitude, And I think my co-founder Mike puts this a good way, where he's like, look, like, yes, climate change is a problem, but are we going to solve climate change by like cutting plastic straws out of our lives? Like, no, like
Gotta be a realist.
No, it's kind of like, hey, like, if I shame you by drinking out of a plastic straw, is that going to make the world a better place? I don't think so. Like, it kind of feels a little penny wise, pound foolish,
Mm-hmm.
But like, hey, like, can we help from position of Timescale? Can we help build the next wave of computing? Help build like, some of our customers are electric car companies. Some of them make batteries for electric cars. Some of them are in other areas of renewable energy like solar and wind. Some folks are in smart agriculture. Some folks are in other industries that are making the world a better place, building new protocols for the internet. And yeah, so, I think we solve our problems by being optimized, by being builders. So I believe in people. I believe in us. I think it's really easy for us to villainize each other. I think it's really easy to villainize technologies. And there's a lot, especially in the tech industry these days, where it becomes an us versus them. And, I would rather not live my life that way. And yeah, man, if you do something bad, or if you kind of break my trust or someone else's trust, okay, that reveals something about you. And when someone tells you who they are, I think you should believe them, But I don't assume that a priori. I assume that we're all good people, and I think that's so. Yeah. So what should people take away? I don't know, man. I'm a perpetual optimist. And I believe in the power of technology, and I believe in us, and I think whatever problems we have, we can solve them. It doesn't mean it'll be easy, but I think the way we get out of it is by having this can-do attitude and not having this victim mentality or having this like blaming mentality or having this like cynicism.
Fair enough. And with that, this has been More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Our guest today was Ajay Kulkarni, founder and CEO at Timescale, not Timescale DB. Thanks a lot, man. That was great.
This podcast is hosted by JD, Command Prompt founder and Postgres conference chair, and is produced by me, Lindsay Hooper, director of events at Command Prompt Inc. Command Prompt provides Postgres support, professional services, custom development, and community leadership. Since 1997, we've focused on providing just excellent service, custom tailored to your organization's needs. We'll see you soon, wherever you get your podcasts.